Good evening, girls. I am Madam Hilda. I am a biology teacher, and we are going to learn about this topic of reception response coordination in plants and animals. And this topic seems to be so long, but it is the easiest topic to discuss. First, you need to understand the terms used in this topic. From the topic itself, it says response and reception response in both plants and animals. In every topic in bio, we are learning about both plants and animals. We remember when you were in Form 1, you first began by saying that all living things undergo irritability, which is sensitivity. And in characteristics of living things, we said that both plants and animals have the ability to detect changes in environment. And not only to detect, after detecting these changes, they respond to them appropriately. Both plants and animals detect changes and they respond to them. But in Form 1, you said that the plants respond to changes in environment so slowly, while animals respond to changes in environment so faster. So they both respond, yes, but the way of responding is depends now. For plants, it is so slow. For animals, it is so fast. And you can even have an example. When it is very hot in the environment, you find yourself that you remove sweater so fast. Why? Because you are an animal. You are an animal. You detect changes to environment so fast compared to plants. Plants can detect yes changes, but they respond so slowly. Um, for example, when you put a plant on a window, and when you put them on a window and there is some little sunlight coming through the window, you will find that this plant will be bending towards the sunlight, but it will not bend immediately. It will take some time for it to bend, maybe after 2 weeks or even 1 week for it to bend, meaning it has changed according to the changes in the environment, but slowly. But for you, when it is very hot, you will first remove the sweater immediately. In fact, you don't take a day. If the sun is too hot, you find yourself removing a sweater immediately because you detect changes in environment so fast. And what are these changes? These changes, conditions in the environment, we refer them as stimuli. That's why in some definition of the word irritability, we refer irritability as ability of organisms to detect stimuli. So stimuli in this case is a condition in the environment. Any condition that leads to changes, we refer it as stimuli. Or we call it stimuli in plural, but in singular, we call it stimulus. So stimuli is a condition in the environment which produces a change, which leads to this change. So we have several types of stimuli. We have external stimuli and we have those internal stimulus, types of stimulus. So the internal stimuli are the internal condition in an organism that leads to changes, internal conditions. But when you talk of external stimuli, these are conditions that are outside the organism that leads to changes. Common examples of external stimuli are like temperature, light, pH. Those are external. Light is outside. Population density. Those are external stimuli that might lead to changes. That might lead to changes in organisms, in a way of living of organisms. But internal stimuli are like accumulation of waste, concentration of gases inside the body, presence of internal parasites, maybe changes in the glucose concentration in the body. Those are internal stimuli. But all in all, these are the things that might lead to a change in the environment. So, after you've known what is irritability, ability of organisms to detect changes in the environment, not only to detect, but appropriately to those changes. Then you need to know the word stimuli. You need to define the two words, because in one way or another, it might be asked in your exam. Ability of organisms to detect changes in the environment, and what is stimuli? Stimuli is a condition in the environment which leads to changes now of change in an activity of part or a whole organisms. It makes that organism to change in one way or another. Any condition. It can be temperature change, humidity change, light change, any change that might lead to changes of these living organisms. We refer them as stimulus. There are terms used also there. Then we ask ourselves, how do these organisms now change? How do they just change? How does this thing happen? How does it happen? It happens whereby the body parts of organisms, and when I talk of organisms, both plants and animals, the body parts of plants and animals receive these stimuli. So there we get the term receptors. So the body parts which are perceive or they receive this stimuli, we call them receptors. They receive this change. They are the ones that detect this change. We call those parts receptors. So when your body is receiving sunlight, the skin becomes now the receptor. It receives the light, the light intensity. So the receptor is the body part which perceives the stimuli, or it detects the stimuli. Now, after receiving it, they have to, the body will respond to it by sending, we call them impulses. For your case, you will continue knowing about the impulses. It is our next, I think, subtopic. You will learn about impulses. The impulses in the skin will take the information to the brain, telling the brain that it is very hot, and that's why you find yourself removing a sweat. So the receptors, which are some of the body parts that perceive changes, will take the information in form of impulses. So you might ask me, what is impulses? Impulses are signals that take information, and we'll get to learn about it in the next topic. They take information. So receptors, the body parts, just know the term receptors. Receptors are parts of the body that perceive the stimuli. So they receive the information and they take the information and they take the information to the effectors. That's when we get the term effector. So effector are body parts that bring about the response now. The body parts that respond back. So when you are feeling a lot of coldness, for example, the information is being taken that it is very cold. It takes to the brain. The brain coordinates everything in your body. Then the impulses are sent back, and you find that your skin, the hairs in your skin will start to stand firm, trying to make your body to be warmer. That is a response back. So if the receptors receive information, takes it to another part of the body that will bring about response. So after the response is being taken back, it is taken back to the body that receives the information, and your body will now be able to manage that stimuli. That's why you'll find yourself removing a sweater, sweating when you're feeling a lot of, when it is very hot, you sweat. That is a response. Sweating is a response of a lot of heat in your body. It is one of example of a response. So response is change in activity by organisms due to stimulus. That change, like changes like sweating due to a lot of hot environment, we call that is an example of a response. So understand those terms. To begin with, I have given you how many terms? 5 terms that you need to know very well. Irritability, ability of organisms to detect changes in the environment and respond to them accordingly. Stimulus, a condition in the environment which it leads to changes now in an organism or part of an organism. Example are like cold, light, pH, change in pH, change in temperature. Those are examples of stimulus. Response now is change in activity by organisms due to stimulus. Now, the response, it is what that change of activity by organisms due to stimulus. When it is due to this stimulus, example, when it is very hot, you respond by sweating. Sweating now is the response. Stimulus in that case is a lot of heat. So receptors are body parts that which perceive stimuli, or they receive this stimuli. From the word receptor, receive. Effectors are those body parts that bring about response. Therefore, sometimes those are the terms. We are done with that. Then, in order for sensitivity and response to be effected, there must be receptors to receive stimuli. Therefore, coordination or coordinators, there must be coordinators to integrate this information, to receive, transmit, and to conduct the stimuli and effectors to respond to the stimuli as. So, in your book, in your bio book, you'll be able to see a drawing or a schematic representation of irritability. You will find that they have written receptors and then effectors and then coordination somewhere there, to mean that the body parts receive information. We refer them as receptors. There is coordination, and what coordinates? Coordination is the process of transmission of information. And I've told you what helps in transmission is the impulses to the body parts that will bring about the response, the changes. It will bring about the response. Those parts are the effectors. So if you are able to understand that representation in your book, it just it tries to simplify it. So we have response. We will begin with response in animals, some of the response to a variety of stimuli in animals, and then some of the response to a variety of stimuli in plants. So response to variety of stimuli by plants. In plants, the changes or the responses, we refer them as taxis. While not in plants, in animals it is taxis, but in plants the responses, we refer them as what? We refer them as mostly as tropism. I know you've heard about them, the tropism, phototropism, chemotropism. Those are the responses in plants. But to begin with, I want us to begin with in animals. In animals, we say that they respond to this stimuli. We don't know now the stimuli. The stimuli can be, we named them. It can be external stimuli or internal stimuli. But there is a positive response and a negative response. Positive response is that response whereby the movement is towards the stimulus. But when we say this is a negative response, it is a movement away from stimulus. Let me give you an example. For example, when there is a lot of sunlight from coming from one direction, you find that when the plant, in this case, sunlight is the stimulus. If the plant will face towards that sunlight, we say that is a positive response. But if the plant leaves will face opposite, where there is a lot of where there is no sunlight, we say that it is a negative response. Hope you've understood that. Positive response is a movement towards a stimulus. Negative response is a movement away from the stimulus. So let's begin by learning several types of responses. One, we have phototaxis. A phototaxis is a response in variation or in light intensity and direction. Mostly, it is shown in most of the Euglena, Spirogyra, and fruit flies. They move towards the light. You find that most animals, when there is a lot of sunlight, they will move. Some will move towards the light, but it's rare for them to move away from light. Most of them will move towards the light. And that's why it has used an example of Euglena and a fruit fly. You will see them moving towards the light. So will it be a positive response or a negative response? Because we expect it, that's why it is called phototaxis. That is a positive response because they are moving. These animals are moving towards the light. So these are response to variation in light intensity and direction. So phototaxis, we refer it as phototaxis, is response to variation of light. And you can give examples of organisms that do that: Euglena, fruit flies, and others. Number 2 is aerotaxis. Aerotaxis is another type of response. This is a response to variation in oxygen concentration. For example, when a amoeba, some call it amoeba, moves from an area of low oxygen concentration to an area of high oxygen concentration. Because all living things depend on oxygen for gaseous exchange. So when some animals like amoeba is moving from where there is low oxygen concentration to where there is high oxygen concentration, this is a response. In this case, oxygen concentration is the stimulus. The animals find it that there is less oxygen where they are, and so they now tend to move where there is oxygen. So when they are moving towards the oxygen, we refer it as a positive response. Most of these responses are positive. So aerotaxis is response to variation in oxygen concentration. We have another, number 3, osmotaxis. Osmotaxis, from the word osmosis, osmotic pressure. You've heard about the word osmosis, osmo. Osmotaxis, responses to variation in osmotic pressure. Mostly it is shown in most of the animals that lives in the seas. Mostly it is shown by marine, the animals that lives down there in the sea, like crabs. When they are moving, when there is a lot of osmotic pressure in water, you find that they will move, they will burrow in the sand. They will go down into the sand to avoid dilution of the body fluids. They go down the sand, they burrow down. They are going away to avoid osmotic what? Pressure. So in this case, you're finding something different. Because we have said that response to variation in osmotic pressure are shown by marine crabs when they burrow in the sand to avoid dilution of the body fluids. Is it a positive or a negative? You find that this is different. This is a negative response because it is away from the stimulus. The stimulus is the animal is responding by moving away from the stimulus. In this case, stimulus is osmotic pressure. The osmotic pressure is too much in the water. So you find these animals burrowing downwards. So they are moving away, meaning the change is negative response away from the stimulus. Rheotaxis. What is rheotaxis? Responses to variation in the direction of water or air current. Mostly it is shown in the also animals that lives in water, like fish. You find that they respond in the opposite direction. Responses to variation in the direction. You find that when water is moving to the west, they are moving to the east. So they are going against the water current. Is that a positive or a negative response? Definitely, it is a negative response. They are going away from the, no, they are moving towards the stimulus. So it is a positive response because it is towards the stimulus. When water is coming on the other way, the fish is also moving towards the water against. So they are moving where there is the stimulus. So it is a positive response. The next is chemotaxis. Chemotaxis is a response to variation in chemical substances. Organisms changes. The organisms change depending with the constitution of chemicals around that place. You find that chemicals, we have several types of chemicals. When you talk of chemical, there are those chemicals that we have that helps to prevent or to kill some of the insects. For example, mosquito. We have repellents that we use to kill mosquitoes. When mosquito is running away from insect repellents, when the mosquito is moving away from these repellents, we say that it is a negative response. They are moving away from the repellent. In this case, the chemical or this repellent now, it is the stimuli. The chemical in this case is the stimuli. So the mosquito has detected it and moved away, bringing the word negative response. The same thing, we have another positive one. Positive chemotaxis. A positive chemotaxis is whereby, an example is whereby male gametes are moving towards the female gamete. They just respond. No one is pushing them. During sex, after when the male gametes are moving, no one pushes them. They just move naturally. After ejaculation, they just move to the female gamete, towards the sperms move to where there is ovum. And they just move towards, meaning it is a positive response. In this case, the gametes are the chemical substance. An example of also a chemotaxis response. These are responses in animals. The next one is thermotaxis. Thermo. When you hear anything thermo, it is temperature. It talks about temperature. It is locomotory response to temperature changes. Changes due to change in temperature. When the body detects temperature and respond to it. So mostly, an example that is used there is a paramecium moves from a location of lower temperature to one of moderate. It's not only about paramecium. We have so many examples, even as human beings. When there is a lot of temperature, you will find yourself moving where there is at least a moderate temperature. Yeah? When it is too hot, you'll find yourself looking for a shade because you want that moderate temperature. So that change of moving away from high temperature, we refer to it as thermotaxis. And it is because you are moving away from it. When it is too hot and you are moving away from it, we call it a negative response. But when it is very cold and you're trying to look for at least a warmer environment, we will call it what? It will be now a positive response because you are moving towards. But when you are going away, it is a negative response. I think we are done with some of the examples of taxis responses or responses in animals towards stimuli. So responses, locomotory responses of motile cells, we refer it as taxis. That's why the word taxis appear in all the types of animals responding to changes in environment. And you've learned that there is positive response and negative response. You should know the there are six. You should understand 6 responses in animals. And you should be able to tell, if you are given an example in exam, you should be able to tell whether it is a positive response or a negative response. And I've said that a positive response is the movement towards that stimulus. And the movement away from the stimulus, we refer it as a negative response. Understand, and you can't forget this. Learn to use the first words like photo. Photo always means light. So when you hear the word phototaxis, it means that it is responses to variation in light. Aerotaxis. Aerotaxis refers to variation in oxygen concentration. It depends. When you just find that it is the animal is responding towards, if it is towards, just know that it is positive response. If it is away, just know it is a negative response. Osmotaxis, when there is a lot of pressure in water, plants, you find that animals will burrow down to the sand, avoiding a lot of water pressure in the sea. So that is osmotaxis. Osmo, always the word osmo in bio means water, something dealing with water. Osmo. So rheotaxis, responses to variation in the direction of water, direction of currents. When fish is moving, when water is moving to the west, the fish is moving to the east. It is towards the direction of water. It is moving towards the direction of water, opposite, against, meaning it is a positive response. It is because it is towards. But if it could be away, it could be negative. Chemotaxis, the same way. Chemochemicals. Chemotaxis, responses to variation in chemicals. Examples of chemicals is gametes. When gametes, and it can be either, chemotaxis can either be positive or negative. It is not always that it should be negative or positive, depending with the question how it comes. For example, in this chemotaxis, it says that movement of male gametes to female gametes. Movement of female gametes, that's an example. Movement of male gametes to female gametes, it is towards. Meaning, that is a positive, because it is towards. Positive chemotaxis. The negative chemotaxis is when mosquito will run away from insect repellents. It is away from the chemical. So ensure you read the question and understand, and be able to tell whether it is a positive or a negative. Therefore, we are done with the examples of animals' responses to the stimuli, animal responses to the stimuli. Meaning, the next we'll move to plants' responses to the stimuli. How do the plants respond to stimuli? But the fact is, both plants and animals respond, but animals respond faster, plants respond so slowly. And sometimes you can find that you are asked about importance of these changes. Why is it important for these tactic? What is the importance of these tactic responses? The tactic, when you hear the word tactic, remember they are talking about what? Animals. I've told you in plants, you will mostly use the word tropism, but for animals, we will always say tactic or taxis. That's why we said chemotaxis, thermotaxis. So survival value, or sometimes you are asked importance of this tactic response. What are some of the importance of these responses? Sometimes, one, it enables organisms to escape from harmful stimuli. For example, when there is excess heat, Thermotaxis in this case will help this animal to escape that too much heat in the environment. Sometimes it is to avoid predators. Sometimes when the mosquito is running away from the repellent, it avoid to die. It will not die, meaning it has survived due to this tactic response. Organisms are also able to seek favorable habitats. For example, when there is a lot of chemicals in that environment and the mosquito detects it, it will move to another environment, meaning it has helped it acquire another habitat that is more safe, that it is not having, the one that is not having chemicals. For example, another example also is mates. It also helps others. It helps for recreational purposes. Like for example, chemotaxis. It enables fertilization to take place. Chemotaxis enables fertilization, and through fertilization, you find that we'll be having additional of adding up of that organism in the environment due to this fertilization. So it has importance. In each and every tactic response, ensure you find at least one importance of each and every response. And then after trying to get at least if I could get your responses, at least you could write down one. Then you can take a photo of it, and then you send me some of the examples of importance, some of the importance of tactic responses. I want to see at least importance of thermotaxis, importance of chemotaxis to that organism or to the environment, depending with the animal. Just give examples of several types of animals that chemotaxis helps in this and this. Thermotaxis can help in this way or that way. Then you will be able to tell. And it depends whether it is a positive phototaxis or a negative phototaxis. If it is a positive phototaxis, say a positive phototaxis not helps in this way. A negative phototaxis also help in this way. And by giving the examples or importance of tactic responses, it means that you've understood well the topic on how animals respond to changes in the environment or to stimulus. Before we will come and discuss in our next lesson on tropism, reception, response, and coordination also in plants. And